Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. Now today's video again is coming to you from the Australian Alps. I'm on my way walking from Mount Hotham down to Dibbon's Hut, and I had one of those moments of clarity of thought. So I was walking along, and the great thing about bushwalking is you've got this open space, no distractions. You can really get lost in your own thoughts, and I was exactly there. I was lost in my own thoughts, and I was pondering something, and suddenly I had a moment of clarity for something I've kind of known about for a while, but haven't really been able to articulate it particularly well. Now, I had this moment of clarity, so I've stopped, I've got out the camera, out the recording gear, and I'm going to try and explain it to you. I'm going to do this as I walk because I'm a little bit pressed for time, so sorry this is going to be a bumpy video, but so be it. I think the idea is worth it. What I want to show you first before we get going is just some context. If we look out here along the path, about, I don't know, this is probably 500 meters back or so, I was in a spot like this, and we can see that we've got these clumps of kind of low-growing shrubs surrounded, that was shrubs and surrounded makes surrounded. So we've got these low-growing shrubs here, surrounded by these grasses, and I was thinking about, kind of wondering why that was, and I realized partway through that I was making a classic mistake in that I was viewing this landscape that I was in as a fixed entity. So is it unchanging? So just assuming that because right now that shrub is surrounded by grass, that it will always be. When in fact natural landscapes are always in flux. So they're always changing. So it could be that for whatever reason, I'm not saying this is the case, but it could be, and this is what prompted my moment of clarity with respect to stormwater treatment. It could be that this landscape, 10 years ago, let's say, because things grow pretty slow up in the high country because it's so cool and you get, snow over it all winter. It could have been that this whole space here, there were in fact no shrubs here and it was all grass. And that it could be that what I'm seeing is a landscape in flux towards a much more shrub-dominated environment like the area behind me there. There's still bits of grass, but you can see there's way more shrubs there. I'm not saying that's the case, but it was the fact that I realized that I was making a critical error in viewing a landscape as fixed rather than changing or in flux that I wanted to share with you. So let's get going on the walk here, because you don't need to be able to see the landscape anymore, but you can get a little bit of a tour of the Australian high country as we go. So I had this realization, and then suddenly I was like, oh, that applies, or that gives me some clarity about something I've been thinking about for a while in stormwater treatment space. So not so long ago, we made a video where I was out at a stormwater treatment system while it was raining. I think we've named the video "When It's Raining We Learn" or something like that. I was out at that system and I was talking a little bit about why I find our current kind of bioretention maintenance like worksheet. So when someone goes out into the field to maintain a bioretention system, they fill out this sheet and it says, oh, inlet must be clear. What's the performance indicator? Is it completely clear? Is it a bit clear? Is it, not clear at all? Oh, litter. Is there 1 piece per square meter? Is there, 1 piece per 2 square meters? 1 piece per 3 square meters. I think I'm going to stumble with my speaking a lot on this video because I'm at slight altitude and slightly out of breath already. But anyway, it's a good workout trying to talk while you're hiking. Anyway, so in that video, I was a bit concerned about these worksheets, and I've suddenly had some clarity that I can explain it a little bit better for you. So let's come back to this concept of fixed versus in flux. I would propose to you that any stormwater treatment system you see, be it a bioretention system, being a wetland, whatever, or a natural wetland, or a creek, any kind of watery, natural or pseudo-natural system, is in fact in a constant state of flux. Is not constantly fixed, and you can prove this to yourself, right? And I'll probably prove it to you in a video at some point in the future. Just find a system, take a photo of it from a fixed point where you can see the system nicely, come back and do the same thing in a month, do it in 2 months, do it in 3 months, Repeat the same thing every month for a year. Then look at all those photos side by side on your computer and tell me that system hasn't changed. It's changed. It's in flux. So in the same way that I was making the error looking at this lovely landscape around me as being fixed in time, I think these worksheets that we've developed for bioretention maintenance are also making the error of being fixed in time. Because if you think about it, let's say you've got a worksheet that says, okay, got different aspects. It's got inlet, it's got outlet, it's got plants. And in the plant section, it says 5 different performance indicators. The top one is not like 90% coverage with desirable plants and no weeds. And the second one is 80% coverage with desirable plants and a few weeds. And all the way down to like no good plants and lots of weeds. Now the problem is that if you walk out to a system and you tick that box, it's completely fixed in time. It's literally just telling you what's there now. It doesn't tell you how it's changing. What we actually know if we want to keep a system in good condition is we need to know its trajectory over time. We need to be able to go, okay, it was here and now it's heading this way. Because if you think about that performance indicator 2, which is 80% good plants and a few weeds. Well, if you walk out to that system, you might see that and be like, awesome, that's really cool. There's only a few weeds in here, that's doing great. This thing's pretty good. We might pull some of those weeds out, but, or we might, actually we will pull those weeds out. And everything will be sweet, mate. But you might not know, maybe there's been a maintenance inspection only 3 weeks before. Maybe it's the wet season. Maybe you're in North Queensland where weeds grow like anything. And the fact that and so maybe 3 weeks ago in the last inspection, it was 90% good plants and no weeds. And so suddenly the change from 90% good to 80% good and from no weeds to some weeds is actually really concerning. And this is the point. This is the moment of clarity for me. We have to manage change in systems, not static points in time. And so what we really need, these sheets that we've got developed are good for data capture, but not actually any good for directing the work that we do. The fact that there is 80% plants and some weeds there now is next to useless, not completely useless, right? I'll go and remove the weeds. That's just a given, but they're nowhere near as useful as they could be. It's the amalgamation of it was like this last week and now it's like this week, and therefore next week we think it's going to be like this, that is way more powerful at directing our maintenance. And so from that we can draw a few conclusions. We can firstly conclude that we could really do with some good asset management software in this space. And we've got a few things on the go in that space, to be honest. We could really do with some good asset management software in this space that allows the maintenance person to be out in the field and to do the inspection of a given point in time and find out that there's this amount of vegetation or that amount of vegetation, but also to be able to, on the spot, see what it was like last time and the time before, and to get a few pictures of those few times and to see how it's changed, and then to make an informed decision based on that. Secondly, it also speaks to why we should be setting up maintenance processes using people who are used to that adaptive approach, that flexible approach. I think this is one of the reasons why I've always favoured getting people with a bushland, like a natural areas maintenance background, to be the people to maintain bioretention systems. Like, leaving aside the fact that there's plants involved in each. In my opinion, the people who do bushland maintenance already have a bit of a grasp of this concept of systems in flux and managing a changing landscape rather than a static one. Whereas, and this is a little bit of a stereotype, and maybe and maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but I get the feeling that people who have traditionally managed hard infrastructure have less of that adaptive management approach involved in it, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not sure. Maybe it's simply the case that the bushland people just have more experience with plants, so pick up the adaptive management approach in a bioretention system that has plants in it easier, perhaps. But nonetheless. But the other thing this then got me thinking about was a parallel with, we're really getting to the descent now down into the valley. This is kind of cool. Hopefully, actually, we'll pause and we'll try and give you a shot of some lovely scenery here. This is really, really cool. So, although I have been walking downhill a bit so far in this trip, so you can see kind of where we've come from, I have largely still been kind of walking down this spur, but we've got to the end of the spur now, and it's time for the descent down into the valley. We've got all these, you know, beautiful old dead trees here. It's spectacular around here. Anyway, let's keep heading down. So I had these thoughts, so we're thinking clarity. So we need to manage systems that as if they are in flux, not a static point in time. And our current inspection sheets, while they are useful for giving us a static point in time, we need to go further if we're going to properly manage these systems and be able to manage that flux. And asset management software that people could access out in the field would be a really seriously good step in that direction, in the right direction. But then I thought of this parallel with something that I know from, or that I've learned or come to believe. Let's say come to believe, because, you know, it's not necessarily any hard truths in this world, but I've come to believe in the world of physical fitness. And this, and I'm going to have to paraphrase this, so I apologize if I get it wrong, but this comes from a man called Ido Portal, who is a human movement specialist. People often call him like a master of movement, but he resists that terminology because the word master implies that you know everything. And Ido would very strongly, I suspect, argue that he is still on a journey of understanding this stuff. And this is actually exactly why the reason in these videos I'm happy to, I don't necessarily create the most polished videos in the world, right? Because I'm recognizing these concepts are still developing up and we're still talking them through with some, you know, some uncertainty involved. So let's just admit that, but let's still recognize that even if we don't know these things for sure, we should still talk about them. Anyway, so Ido talks about how in physical training, so say you're trying to train an athlete, you can, there are like 3 levels of knowledge how you could train someone. So there can, and again, I'm gonna have to paraphrase this, I'm gonna get it wrong, but you could imagine principles, so fundamental underlying principles. You can imagine practices. So a practice might be going for a run. So a principle might be, a principle might be the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands. So that effectively means that the body adapts in a very specific manner when you impose a demand on it. So in this case, the demand might be, say if you do a pull-up, right? That is an imposed demand. You are imposing something demanding upon your body. And the body reacts to that in a very specific manner in that it makes you good at doing pull-ups. But it doesn't necessarily make you particularly good at other upper body based pulling exercises. It will improve those a little bit, but most of the demands are very, very specific to the exercise that you are doing. So that's a principle, right? So high level, and you can apply that across different things. So I could apply that to, to squatting. I could apply that to deadlifting, or I could apply that to pull-ups or anything else. Whereas a practice might be going for a run. And then the third level here is a technique, which is, knees out when you squat, that would be a cue, but that would be part of the technique of squatting. So the technique for squat would be you want a braced neutral spine. You don't actually need to understand what that means if you're not into, the gym culture. Braced neutral spine. You want to keep your chest up when you squat and knees out, let's say, and weight on heels. So those things combined create the technique for a good squat. And so Ido talks about how heaps of people, know the technique for a good squat and might have ideas for practices for how to use it, but that it's principles that are most powerful. Because if you understand the principles and understand the techniques, then you can develop the right practice for any, and this is where we're getting back to stormwater, for any given circumstance. So think about this. If you understand, say, the SAID principle, and you have someone who comes to you, well, I'm going to make this example up on the fly. So let's say, yeah, you understand the SAID principle, and you understand the mechanics of squatting, and someone comes to you and says, okay, and a basketballer comes to you and says, I want to be able to jump higher. And so, but you've never trained a basketballer before. You've only ever trained sprinters, let's say. You can then take the principles that you know. If you understand the principles of training really well, including the SAID principle and many others, you can combine those principles with techniques you know and develop a practice that makes sense for the basketballer, even though you've never actually trained a basketballer before. Whereas if you only knew the practices that your sprinters applied and the techniques that your sprinters applied, so, you know, bounding drills, sprinting drills, this sort of thing, you would feel quite lost when it came to helping the basketballer. Because you'd be like, oh, wait, hang on. I don't understand why I'm doing that with the sprinters. I know it works, but I don't understand why. And if I don't understand why, I can't then go and apply that to someone else. So let's bring this back to stormwater. There's an analogy here. So we have principles, we have practices, and we have techniques. So in stormwater, a principle might be get the weeds out. Ooh, is that a practice? No, a principle might be don't let weeds establish in the system. And various practices might be remove weeds when they appear, plant lots of trees when they, I'm getting, okay, let's just remove a level. No, we still need, yeah, okay. Okay, it's getting challenging here. Getting challenging to explain this. So this is interesting. This was, at the beginning of this video, I had this moment of clarity. I was able to explain some of this, but now I've got to this point where I still don't quite have this analogy worked up in my mind. And right this second, I'm telling you all about that to try and buy myself time to figure it out while I'm walking. Anyway, so I think the point that I'm getting at here is that if you tell someone, okay, it's not quite the same as the basketball analogy I gave you before. So, stormwater. The principle might be, don't let weeds establish in the system. The practice might be, so you might have some practices which are pull out the weeds, poison the weeds, plant lots of trees to shade out the weeds. There's others, but we can just go with those three for now. And then, yeah, and then the technique level is where our current kind of check sheets for out in the field are at. So it says, plants. Do you have this many plants? They are currently at the, at this very basic kind of yes/no technique level. Whereas I think we'll get much better results, or be able to adapt to different situations much better if we approach maintaining stormwater treatment systems by understanding the principles. If you understand the principle, you are much better able to adapt to a different system. So let's see. Okay, so we come back to the example before of the 90% good plants, no weeds, or the 80% 80% good plants, some weeds example, and the change over time. So you could have two situations. So you've come out to that system and you see it at 80% good plants and some weeds. And then you look up in your magical asset management software that we don't have yet, but hopefully will in the future. And you see, in fact, that it was 90% good plants and no weeds last time. Now, if you have a good understanding of the fundamental principles of how this stuff works, then you can say, oh, okay, big red flag here. Big red flag, there's lots of weeds coming in really recently. We better get rid of those because we know that in general, they're probably going to keep getting themselves established and we want to get them out of there before they can set a seed bank. So that's understanding the principle. As long as you have a bit of an understanding of the various techniques, you can figure it out for that site. You don't need a dedicated maintenance plan. That's it. Because the dedicated training program for the sprinter is akin to the dedicated maintenance program for individual asset by asset. So this is interesting. So when I talk to people involved in maintaining, or who are involved in maintenance of stormwater stuff, but they haven't really had a chance to kind of get into the maintenance of the green infrastructure yet, like the bioretention systems. They're also like, oh, every asset's so different. That's, I get told that quite regularly. Every asset's really, really different. Like, you got to figure it out on the go. But no. If you understand the principles underneath this, then you can look at any asset that might on the surface look really different, but you can look at how it's changed a little bit from one day to another. And using those principles, really clearly know what to do to it, even if there's not a specific manual. And in fact, it's probably the case that it's entirely impossible to write a specific manual that would deal with that flux over time. Wow, okay. So I have to pause for a second here because I've got clarity in my own mind and I've talked some stuff through to you, but I don't know if I've actually explained this well. So I think what I'm getting at, let's try and summarize this for you. You are a coach, okay, sports training. 3 levels: principles, practices, techniques. You are a sprinting coach who only understands the practices, bounding, sprinting drills, those sorts of things, and the techniques, not heel striking, for example, in the running. You understand that, and a basketballer comes to you and wants to jump high, you're going to be lost as to how to write a program for them. But if you understand the principles of why bounding and sprinting works to make a sprinter better, you can then apply that to a basketballer and maybe bias it with some more squatting and different things. You can then create a program because you understand the fundamental underlying principles. Come to stormwater treatment, and if you are looking at maintaining stormwater treatment systems based on what a manual says, i.e. a set of practices, I go out every time and I do this, and I do that, and I do that, and I walk away. What will happen is a couple of things. Firstly, it's going to be tough to adapt from system to system. And I think I can now understand why it would feel daunting when every bioretention system is different. But in fact, if we can understand that there are some fundamental key underlying principles that sit beneath maintaining any green asset, any dynamic, any asset that is in flux, then if we understand those principles, then we can adapt from system to system to system. And this probably explains to me why I feel that bushland re-veg people intuitively get how to maintain stormwater treatment systems better. It's not because they're any smarter, it's not because they're special, it's simply because they happen to have been working in a space that already works at understanding principles and applying those to different landscapes. And so they can do that really, really quickly and really, really nicely in this space. Now I'm super aware that I'm at like 25 minutes of video here and this thing cuts out at about the 33-minute mark. So let's wrap it up there. I'm super curious to know whether this video was useful to you, because it was very much like it was very much a spur of the moment. It wasn't super well thought out to begin with, but it's been incredibly useful for me to try and talk this stuff through to you, particularly to talk it through with you while I was on video or mic'd up, because it put the pressure on me that when I started to stumble a little bit, when I started to not quite understand some of it, I had to try and figure it out on the go. So I'd like to say a big thanks for anyone who's got this far in this video. Big thanks for listening in. I appreciate the fact that you have, because it's been a really useful exercise for me, and I hope it's been a really useful exercise for you. In fact, see, I was not talking straight to finish this again. It's been that really useful exercise for me, so I appreciate it. I would love your feedback on it. Was it, in fact, useful for you? Did I make sense in this? Did I make sense at the beginning, but then start to, stop making sense towards the end? Let me know. And in general, if you have any feedback or any questions, any comments about any of the videos or the things that we make here at Ideanthro, by all means, let us know. You can find us online at www.ideanthro.com. We have our Connect page there where you can find all our contact details. You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Sweet. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed a bit of the scenery up here on the way from Mount Hotham to Dibbins Heart. Cool. See ya.